Well, welcome everybody to the January 2011 edition of the alumni program for the Sunshine Coast Health Center. And this month, I'm going to talk about one of the dangers of spirituality. Now, spirituality is a hot topic, right? You can't go to Cole's books or Black Bond books or chapters or whatever, go to the section called spirituality. And they've got spirituality of this and spirituality of that. And you can get into apparently eco-spirituality, which I've never heard until about a week ago, which is some kind of connection with nature. Mindfulness, of course, has been around for a long time, and you may not be aware of this, but research and practice in psychedelics is actually growing as we speak. Some research done at some pretty big universities around the world, including in the United States, on this topic. So it's a big topic. But there's this psychiatrist by the name of Charles Whitfield. And he mentioned a few years ago about this thing called a spiritual bypass. This is the danger of spirituality, or one of them. And the way he describes it is, we've come from this place of confusion and feeling this void in ourselves that we filled up with drugs, and how nice it would be just to jump into this thing called spirituality with all its serenity and peace, because it actually feels good. But by doing that, by this jumping, what we do is we bypass all the middle stages. And there's a lot of psychologists who believe that it's actually in the middle stages we have to work through and face our fears and challenge ourselves, so that it's not merely a matter of just jumping into peace and serenity. In fact, there's some people, like I'm thinking of psychologist Kirk Schneider, one of the up-and-coming psychologists, written, I think must be up to like 10 books, very famous therapist. And he talks about this sort of jumping spirituality as short-term and has no real lasting benefits. And it's because for Schneider, real spirituality is looking also at the things that make us suffer and somehow holding in balance this tension between all the good stuff in life, but also all this stuff like guilt and anger and maybe some physical stuff happening. And we have to come to terms with that. That's what real spirituality is all about. Anyway, this thing that Charles Whitfield called, the psychiatrist, called a spiritual bypass. Over the years, working with a lot of people with addiction problems, I've noticed that there are this certain percentage of people who really like this spiritual bypass. So it's like they move from this horrifying life, and then all of a sudden they're just walking around with a smile on their face, and it's like, well, how are you doing today, Harry? Well, my dog passed away, my favorite dog, but I now understand that this is part of life, and everything's okay. And I'm looking at him, Harry, your dog just died, right? Like, aren't you sad? Well, I was sad a bit, but I made sense of my sadness and everything's okay. It's almost like they're it's almost like they're intoxicated, right? Almost like it's serving the same purpose the drug did. But anyway, they seem to just sort of dismiss all these horrible things in life, or these things that they're really struggling with, really trying to come to terms with. Just forget all that. And we'll just jump into being, everything's okay. Right? So I thought this month we'd talk about that. A lot of psychologists, by the way, are writing a great deal about this spiritual bypass. They don't use that term, by the way, but it's become noticeable to a lot of psychologists, so they're making comments on that. One of the people I've been reading lately, he passed away a few years ago, a guy by the name of Jim Dugan. Now, Dr. Bugenthal was a very famous psychologist. I believe he worked out of California. At any rate, he talked in one of his books about this very successful business guy. And fantastically successful, actually. Like, outwardly looks like the perfect person to run a business, right? Very successful, made lots of money. Oh, investors just loved him. Oh, so everything's great. And then he gets panic attacks, right? So he goes to Dr. Bugenthal and says, please help me. So through the process of therapy, Bugenthal discovers that what this guy's actually afraid of is actually, if he's not a businessman, he's nothing. He has, like, for him, literally no life outside of being a businessman. So he's basically nothing. And that's actually the term that Bugenthal uses, is this guy's actual fear was nothingness. The fact that he didn't exist if he weren't a businessman. And this made him, drove him to work these incredible hours. And he really didn't like delegating things because, oh my God, what if they screwed up? And there's a lot of psychology involved in investors. They have to have confidence in you, right? You need a good track record. And so this guy would put in this enormous amount of hours, and to the detriment of everything else in his life. And then as he became older, he began recognizing that, holy mackerel, if I'm not a businessman, who am I? And this is where the panic attacks, all this anxiety started coming for him. And I've noticed too, with a lot of the clients from Sunshine Coast, I don't know if you remember this, but they spent an awful lot of time thinking about their jobs and talking about their jobs. In fact, I've heard life stories that are nothing but work. No talk of family or lovers or kids. It's just work, 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 work. And it's like when they tell the story of their work, this is where their self-esteem comes from. This is why they get up in the morning, and all they are workers. And then they get thrown for a loop if anything happens. Like, for example, they get fired, or maybe they make a bad investment decision and the company's in trouble. All of these things start creeping up, and then, oh my God, who am I if I'm not a worker? And some of these people, and it just doesn't have to be work, it can be pretty much anything. And there are some people here, for example, I don't know if you remember them during your time here, that they want to be the best drug addict on the planet. And like everybody else was kind of wussy compared to them. They were like the superstar of drug addicts, right? I don't know if you remember some of those guys when you were here. But at least it gave them some meaning, some identity, right? But without that, they get this actual fear, and this is a very deep fear that, my God, maybe I am nothing. Maybe I don't really exist. And so what some of these people do, and again, not all of them, but just some of them, they latch onto this spirituality thing, and they say, oh my God, this is what I've been missing, right? This is what I've been missing in my life. So then they get involved in whatever it is they're doing for spirituality. It could be meditation, could be back to nature, could be anything. And they'll start talking about, oh, the rainbows, and they're so incredible, and oh, I missed it for so many years. But they never really actually address their fears and the things that challenge them, right? And this is the danger of the spiritual bypass, that without actually addressing what's really frightening for them, what's really causing all this great anxiety, without addressing it directly, by just jumping to serenity and peace and all that, they can actually suffer quite badly. Because if you don't address this stuff, it's coming out. One way or the other, it's coming out. And so the spiritual bypass is, although it feels good and everything, very short term. Anyway, we'll give you some insight during January's program on the spiritual bypass, but just keep your eyes open for it. I mean, with all this talk of spirituality, and you've got Deepak Chopra on the one side, and I don't know, Eckhart Tolle on the other, that a lot of the thoughtful people involved in this field are actually beginning to be concerned that maybe it's not quite as easy as it's made out to be in the self-help books. Anyway, that's it for this week, and we'll be back next week with another edition.